The sirens were so loud I thought they'd shatter the windows. 2 police officers stood in my living room while my husband screamed that I was insane, that I'd fabricated everything. His face had gone purple, veins bulging at his temples. The younger officer kept one hand near his belt, watching him like you'd watch a dog that might bite. I just sat there on the cream sofa we'd picked out together 32 years ago, hands folded in my lap, feeling nothing. Absolutely nothing. The divorce papers were spread across the coffee table like accusation-made paper. But that explosion? That was 3 months in the making. 3 months earlier, I was standing in our kitchen in Phoenix making Robert's favorite breakfast. Blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, not that corn syrup garbage he claimed he couldn't tell the difference with. I could tell the difference. The May sunlight was doing that thing where it turns everything golden, and I remember thinking how lucky I was. 63 years old, married to a successful commercial real estate developer, living in a house with a view of Camelback Mountain. My daughter lived in Seattle with her family, but we video called every Sunday. My son worked in Robert's company. Everything was fine. That's the word I used back then. Fine. Not great. Not wonderful. Fine. Like room temperature water. I didn't realize I was describing a life that had already flatlined. Robert came down wearing one of his expensive suits, the charcoal one that made his silver hair look distinguished. He was 67 but could pass for younger. He worked out with a personal trainer 3 times a week, ate clean as the kids say. He glanced at the pancakes and frowned. "I'm meeting a client for breakfast," he said, not looking at me. "Property development deal in Scottsdale." I felt something twist in my chest, but I plastered on a smile. "Oh, I didn't know. You should have told me. I'm telling you now." He grabbed his keys. "Don't wait up. Might be late." The door closed before I could respond. I stood there holding the spatula, watching the pancakes get cold, and that's when I noticed something. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Not peaceful quiet. Lonely quiet. There's a difference. I scraped the pancakes into the trash and poured myself coffee with hands that shook just slightly. When had that started? The shaking, I mean. And when had he stopped kissing me goodbye? But here's the thing about betrayal. The real deep kind that burrows into your bones. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It creeps in wearing the mask of normal. A missed breakfast here, a forgotten anniversary there. Working late becomes the default. Conversation becomes transaction. You stop being a wife and become furniture, comfortable, familiar, easy to ignore. I cleaned up the kitchen and did what I did every day. Yoga class at 9 with the other women my age who still believed in keeping their bodies strong. Grocery shopping. Lunch with my friend Patricia, who talked endlessly about her grandchildren while I smiled and nodded. Then home to an empty house that echoed. The routine had become my armor. Each activity carefully scheduled to fill the hours until Robert came home. Or didn't come home. I'd stopped keeping track of which was more common. At yoga, I watched the other women chat and laugh between poses. Their easy camaraderie, something I used to have before Robert started discouraging my friendships. "They're just using you for connections," he'd say. Or, "Do you really need to spend so much time away from home?" Slowly, I'd pulled back from everyone until my social circle had shrunk to Patricia, and even that felt like something I had to sneak around to maintain. During grocery shopping, I found myself standing in the pasta aisle for 10 minutes, paralyzed by the question of what to make for dinner. Would Robert even be home to eat it? Should I buy ingredients for 2 or just for 1? These small decisions had become minefields of uncertainty. I bought for 2. I always bought for 2. Hope is a stubborn thing. Robert came home at 11 that night. I was already in bed, pretending to read a mystery novel I couldn't focus on. He showered, which he never did at night. He was a morning shower person. Always had been. 32 years of marriage. You learn these things. You catalog them without meaning to. He slid into bed without touching me. The mattress dipped, and I felt the distance between us like a physical thing. 6 inches of Egyptian cotton sheets might as well have been the Grand Canyon. "How was your meeting?" I asked the ceiling. "Productive." One word, that's all I got. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to roll over and demand he look at me, really look at me, and tell me what was happening to us. But that voice in my head, that poisonous little whisper, kept saying, maybe you're being paranoid. Maybe you're making something out of nothing. Maybe this is just what 32 years looks like. The voice sounded reasonable, mature, like the voice of a woman who understood that romance fades and what matters is stability. That voice was a liar. The thing about self-doubt is it's insidious. It starts small, like a splinter you barely notice. Was his tone sharp, or are you being sensitive? Did he really forget your birthday, or has he just been stressed with work? Is he pulling away, or are you clingy? Each question plants a seed of uncertainty, and before you know it, you're second-guessing every instinct, every observation, every feeling that tells you something is wrong. I questioned everything except the one thing I should have questioned, him. The next morning, Robert was up and gone before I woke. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Golf with clients. Dinner meeting after. Order takeout. I stared at that note like it was written in code I'd forgotten how to read. When had he started golfing on Wednesdays? When had our communication devolved into post-it notes and text messages? I called Patricia. Am I losing my mind? Or is Robert acting strange? Strange how? She was eating something crunchy. Probably those rice crackers she swore were better than potato chips. Distant, always working, never home. She laughed. Honey, that's called being married to a successful man. My Harold was the same way before he retired. Relax. Enjoy having the house to yourself. I wanted to tell her it was different. That Harold never made her feel invisible. That Harold still held her hand at parties and remembered her coffee order and asked about her day like he actually cared about the answer. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I thanked her for the advice and hung up feeling more alone than before I'd called. That's the thing about isolation. It's not always physical. You can be surrounded by people, friends, family, acquaintances, and still feel completely alone when no one truly sees what you're going through. When everyone has a rational explanation for why you're wrong to feel hurt. When the world tells you to be grateful for what you have instead of asking for what you need. See? Even my best friend thought I was overreacting, so I did what any good wife would do. I swallowed my suspicions. I smiled through the loneliness. I accepted the crumbs of attention he threw my way like they were banquets. Because questioning him meant questioning everything, our life, our history, our future, and that was terrifying. But here's what I didn't understand then. Silence isn't peace. It's surrender. Every time I swallowed a question, every time I accepted less than I deserved, I was giving away pieces of myself. Little slivers of dignity, stacked up like kindling, waiting for a match. 2 weeks later, we had dinner together. Actual dinner, sitting across from each other at the dining room table I'd insisted we use instead of eating in front of the TV. I'd made his favorite, pot roast with roasted vegetables. I'd even opened a bottle of the Cabernet he liked. I'd spent 3 hours preparing that meal. Not because it required 3 hours, but because I'd kept stopping to stare out the kitchen window, wondering if this dinner would be different. If tonight he'd look at me the way he used to. If we'd talk about something real, instead of exchanging pleasantries like polite strangers. I'd set the table with our good china, the wedding pattern we'd registered for 32 years ago. The candlelight reflected off the gold rim of the plates, casting warm shadows across the dining room. He ate mechanically, scrolling through his phone between bites. Robert, I said carefully, when was the last time we went out? Just the two of us? He didn't look up. We go out. To business dinners, I mean, a date, something fun. We're not 20 anymore. What do you want? Dinner and a movie. His tone made it sound ridiculous, made me sound ridiculous. I just thought, I'm tired, okay? Work has been insane. The Scottsdale project is massive, and if I don't close this deal... He trailed off, stabbing at a carrot. I should have pressed. I should have said that successful men still make time for their wives, that being tired isn't an excuse for treating me like an inconvenience. Instead, I nodded. Of course, I understand. And that's how it went, month after month of understanding, of being reasonable, of not making waves. I became an expert at swallowing hurt, at reframing neglect as necessary sacrifice. He was building our future, I told myself. This was temporary. Things would get better once the project was done, once the stress eased, once. The sacrifices started small, canceled plans because he had to work, vacations postponed, then forgotten entirely. Our anniversary dinner moved 3 times before he finally showed up 40 minutes late, still on his phone, barely tasting the expensive meal I'd planned for weeks. But the real sacrifice, the one that gutted me, that was my dignity. I can pinpoint the moment I handed it over. We were at a company party, one of those fancy affairs at a resort in Scottsdale with open bar and a live band. I was wearing a new dress, had gotten my hair done. I'd wanted to feel beautiful, wanted him to see me the way he used to. Robert was across the room talking to a group of investors. I walked over with a glass of wine, smiling, ready to join the conversation. He glanced at me like I was a stranger who'd interrupted something important. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I whispered. "I'm in the middle of something." His voice was ice. "It'll just take—" "Not now." He turned his back to me. I stood there like an idiot, my face burning, while those investors pretended they hadn't witnessed my humiliation. I walked away on shaking legs and spent the rest of the party in the bathroom, reapplying mascara I'd cried off. That night, I didn't say anything. I didn't fight. I just accepted it as the price of being married to an important man. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. I was afraid. Afraid that if I complained, if I demanded better, he'd leave. And being invisible was still better than being alone. Or so I thought. The pattern continued. He forgot my birthday 3 years running. Stopped asking about my day. Stopped touching me, except for perfunctory kisses on the cheek when he remembered. I became background noise in my own marriage. And I let it happen. I let it happen because confronting it meant admitting I'd wasted 32 years on a man who saw me as decorative furniture. It meant facing the possibility that I was unlovable, that age had made me irrelevant, that the girl he'd married had disappeared, and he had no use for the woman who remained. Self-doubt is a prison where you're both the guard and the prisoner. Every day I woke up choosing to ignore the signs. Every night I went to bed rationalizing his behavior. Maybe he really was just stressed. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe this was normal and I was the problem. The day everything imploded started like any other Wednesday in July. Phoenix heat that made the air shimmer. I was planning dinner, something light because of the temperature, maybe a salad with grilled chicken. Robert was supposed to be in meetings all day, or so his calendar said. I'd stopped asking for details months ago because his irritation at my questions wasn't worth the minimal information I'd get. My phone rang. Our son, Marcus. "Mom, are you sitting down?" My heart seized. "What's wrong? Is it one of the kids?" "No, nothing like that. It's—" "Mom, I quit today." I sat at the kitchen table, confused. "Quit what?" "The company. Dad's company. I can't work for him anymore." "Marcus, what are you talking about? You love that job. You're being groomed to take over." That's what I thought too. His voice was bitter. But there's someone else being groomed. Someone Dad thinks is more suitable. My hands gripped the edge of the kitchen table. Something in Marcus's tone made my stomach drop. That particular quality of hurt mixed with anger. I knew it intimately, because I'd been swallowing it down for months. "Who?" He paused. I could hear him breathing, gathering courage. In the background, I heard what sounded like traffic. He was outside, maybe in his car, somewhere private where his wife wouldn't overhear this conversation. That detail alone told me how bad this was going to be. Her name is Amber. She's 29. She's been working there for 6 months, and somehow she's already a senior VP. Funny how that works. The kitchen tilted. "What are you saying?" "Mom," his voice cracked. "I'm saying Dad's having an affair. I'm saying he's been parading her around the office like she's already family. I'm saying he told me yesterday that when he retires, she'll be running the company. Not me. Her." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered on the tile floor. I could hear Marcus calling my name, tiny and distant, but I couldn't move. My body had stopped taking commands from my brain. That metallic taste flooded my mouth, the one you get right before you vomit. 29. Senior VP. 6 months. The pieces assembled themselves without my permission. The late nights, the showers, the distance, the golf games that weren't golf games, the business dinners, the smell of perfume on his collar that time I did laundry, something floral and young that I'd convinced myself came from a client's hug. I'd known. On some level, I'd known. But knowing and admitting are different countries. And I'd built a wall between them tall enough to block out the sun. I picked up the phone. "I have to go. Mom, wait." I hung up. Then I sat there in my beautiful kitchen with its granite counters and stainless steel appliances, and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there while my life rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Have you ever had a moment where reality just cracks open and shows you what was always there? Where everything you thought was solid turns out to be made of paper and lies? That's what the next hour felt like. I walked through the house like a detective at a crime scene. Our bedroom, his closet. I'd never snooped before because snooping meant I didn't trust him. And not trusting your husband meant you were paranoid and insecure, and all those things I'd spent 3 decades trying not to be. But that version of me, the one who worried about being paranoid, had just died in the kitchen. What replaced her was someone colder, clearer, someone who understood that trust without verification is just another word for willful blindness. His suits hung in perfect rows, his shoes lined up, everything organized, everything in its place. I started methodically, suit by suit, pocket by pocket. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I thought I'd be nervous, afraid of what I'd find. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious, clinical, like a surgeon opening up a patient to find out exactly how extensive the cancer was. Nothing in the first 3. The 4th had a receipt from a restaurant in Scottsdale. Dinner for 2, steak and lobster, a bottle of wine that cost $200. The date was our anniversary. The anniversary he'd said he'd had to work late. I held that receipt for a long moment, reading it over and over. He'd taken her to Kai, the 5 Diamond restaurant at the Sheraton Grand, the place I'd mentioned wanting to try for years. Too expensive, he'd always said. Maybe for a special occasion. Apparently our anniversary was special, just not with me. My hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady, mechanical. I kept searching. Credit card statements in his desk drawer. Jewelry purchases I'd never received. Hotel rooms in cities where he'd claimed to have business meetings. Flowers sent every Friday to an address I didn't recognize. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping sales, he'd been financing a whole separate life. The affair was bad. The financial betrayal was worse. But what made me stop breathing, what made the room spin, was a document in his safe. I knew the combination because we'd set it together years ago, our wedding anniversary. How's that for irony? It was a revision to our trust. Recent, 2 weeks old. It named Amber as primary beneficiary, not Marcus, not our daughter Sarah. Amber. A woman I'd never met was slated to inherit everything we'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for. 32 years reduced to a footnote. He was replacing me. Completely. Not just in his bed, but in his life, his business, his future. I was being erased like I'd never existed. I thought of all those nights I'd lain awake feeling crazy for thinking something was wrong. All those times I doubted my own instincts, my own judgment, my own worth. The gaslighting hadn't been dramatic. It had been steady and subtle. Every time he'd made me feel unreasonable for wanting attention, every time he'd acted like I was demanding for expecting basic respect, every time he'd trained me to settle for less and call it maturity. I closed the safe, put everything back exactly as I'd found it, walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror for the first time in months. The woman staring back was a stranger. Tired eyes, posture that curved inward like I was trying to take up less space. When had I started shrinking? When had I stopped seeing myself as a person who deserved to be seen? I turned away. I couldn't look at her. That broken thing in the mirror was my collapse made visible, and I wasn't ready to face it yet. The next morning, Robert came home whistling. Actually whistling. I was making coffee, moving on autopilot, and he breezed in like he didn't have a care in the world. "Morning," he said, grabbing a travel mug. "Marcus quit yesterday." He froze for half a second, then shrugged. Kids these days, no work ethic. "He said you're promoting someone else to run the company." "He told you about Amber?" Robert's voice was carefully neutral. "She's very talented. I'm mentoring her." Mentoring, that's what he called it. "Is that all you're doing?" His eyes went flat. "What exactly are you implying?" This was my moment. I could push. I could confront him with what I knew. But something stopped me. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was strategy. I thought about that trust document, about how thoroughly he'd planned my erasure, and I realized something crucial. If I confronted him now, he'd just lie better. He'd hide the evidence. He'd make me look crazy. He'd been doing it for months, maybe years, and he was good at it. So good I'd convinced myself I was the problem. "Nothing," I said quietly. "I'm not implying anything." He relaxed, smiled, kissed my cheek like I was a child he was humoring. "Good. I'd hate for you to get confused about the business. It's complicated stuff." The condescension was so casual it barely registered as an insult. That's how normalized it had become. He left. I stood in the kitchen listening to his car pull away, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to doubt myself. I wasn't going to shrink. I was going to get angry. But anger without a plan is just noise. And I needed more than noise. I needed proof. I needed leverage. I needed to be smart about this because Robert held all the cards, the money, the business, the lawyers on retainer. I had nothing except the truth. And truth without evidence is just your word against his. So I did something I'd never done before. I went to church. I'm not religious. Never have been. Robert and I did the Christmas and Easter thing for the kids when they were young, but it was more tradition than faith. But Patricia had mentioned her priest, Father Michael, had started a counseling ministry, and desperate times call for desperate measures. The church was a modest building in Tempe, with a parking lot full of sun-bleached cars and a sign advertising free counseling services on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I sat in my car for 15 minutes before going in, trying to figure out what I was even doing there. What could a priest tell me that I didn't already know? That adultery was wrong? That I deserved better? I knew these things. Knowing didn't fix anything. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who wouldn't tell me to relax and enjoy having the house to myself. Someone who wouldn't make excuses for Robert. Someone who would just see me. Except Father Michael was on sabbatical and the counseling ministry was being run by someone else. Someone I wasn't expecting. Her name was Sister Joan, and she was nothing like what I'd imagined a nun would be. 70-something, built like a linebacker, with eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. She wore regular clothes, jeans and a sweater, And when I knocked on her office door, she was eating a sandwich and watching Judge Judy. "Can I help you?" she asked, hitting pause. I stood there like an idiot, wondering what I was even doing. I think I need to talk to someone." "Well, you're in the right place. Sit." I sat. And then, for the first time in months, maybe years, I started talking. Really talking. Not the sanitized version I gave Patricia. Not the everything's fine performance I gave my kids. The truth. All of it. The loneliness, the humiliation, the affair, the money, the trust document. The way I'd let myself disappear. Sister Joan listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, she handed me a tissue. "You done feeling sorry for yourself?" she asked. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you're done, because self-pity is fine for about 5 minutes, but then it's time to do something about it." "I don't know what to do. He has everything. The lawyers. The money. And you have something he doesn't." "What?" "The moral high ground." She leaned forward. "And more importantly, you have me. I used to be a lawyer before I took my vows. Corporate litigation. I know every trick in the book, and I know exactly how men like your husband operate." I later learned that scientific studies reveal that abuse victims are 3 times more likely to have depression 3 years later. Sitting in that office, listening to Sister Joan lay out how coercive control works, how men like Robert isolate and diminish their partners until they can't imagine life without them, I realized I was looking at my future if I didn't act. "So what do I do?" I asked. "You document everything. Every lie, every financial transaction, every moment he treats you like garbage. You build a case so airtight he can't wriggle out of it. And then," she smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile, "then you take him to the cleaners." Over the next month, Sister Joan became my anchor. We met twice a week, sometimes more. She taught me about coercive control, about how abusers don't need to hit you to destroy you, how they use financial manipulation, isolation, and gaslighting to make you dependent, how they groom you to accept less and less until you forget you ever deserved more. It was like she was reading my marriage like a textbook. "He didn't replace you overnight," she said during one session. "He's been training you to be replaceable for years. Every time he dismissed your feelings, every time he made you feel small, he was paving the way for this moment." She was right. I could trace it back. The slow erosion of my confidence. The way he'd gradually cut me off from friends by making social events about his business. The way he'd taken over our finances, insisting he was better with money, until I had no idea what we had or where it was. The way he'd made me feel guilty for wanting his time, his attention, his respect. Statistics show that 95% of coercive control victims are women, Sister Joan said. The system is designed to favor men like your husband, but that doesn't mean we can't beat him at his own game. She helped me open my own bank account at a different bank, helped me organize my documentation, taught me how to take screenshots, how to access cloud storage, how to create a paper trail that couldn't be denied. She even connected me with a private investigator, a retired cop who owed her a favor. "I want photos," I told him. "I want evidence he can't explain away." He nodded. "I'll get you what you need." And he did. Oh, he did. Photos of Robert and Amber at restaurants, at hotels, at her apartment, kissing in his car in the parking garage at his office. The investigator even got pictures of them at a jewelry store, Robert buying her a ring. A ring. While I was at home eating leftovers and watching Wheel of Fortune. Each photo was a knife in my chest, but I didn't cry. I filed them away, added them to my growing dossier. Bank statements showing the money he'd been siphoning into a separate account. Emails to his lawyer about restructuring assets. Text messages to Amber where he called me the old ball and chain and joked about how clueless I was. Reading those texts was educational. Did you know that 60 to 80% of domestic abuse cases involve coercive control? That's what the literature Sister Joan gave me said. And that's exactly what my marriage had become. A prison without bars where I was the warden of my own cell. But knowledge is power, and I was done being powerless. I kept up the performance at home, smiled when Robert came in late, nodded when he made excuses, asked about his day in that pleasant, undemanding way he'd trained me to use. I was the perfect wife, invisible, uncomplaining, exactly what he wanted. And all the while, I was building my case. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Cooking his meals, doing his laundry, sleeping next to him while knowing where he'd been, who he'd been with, what he'd planned for me. Sometimes I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in his face and demand he explain. But Sister Joan's voice would echo in my head. Patience. Let him think he's won. Let him get comfortable. That's when people make mistakes. The performance required every ounce of self-control I had. There was one night, I remember it vividly, when Robert came home smelling of that same floral perfume. He kissed my cheek absently and told me he'd been at a networking event. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, and I had to grip the knife handle so hard my knuckles went white to stop myself from confronting him right there. "How was it?" I asked, my voice steady. "Boring. Same people, same conversations." He loosened his tie. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken stir-fry." "Sounds good." He walked away to change clothes, and I stood there at the cutting board, knife in hand, feeling like I was splitting in two. There was the me performing the role of oblivious wife, and there was the real me underneath, cataloging every lie, every detail, every piece of ammunition I'd use later. So I waited, I documented, I prepared, and I almost got caught. It was a Tuesday in August. Robert came home unexpectedly in the middle of the day. I was in his office, photographing the latest bank statements I'd found. I heard his car in the driveway, and my heart stopped. I shoved everything back into the drawer, powered off my phone, and was sitting in the living room with a magazine when he walked in. "What are you doing home?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Forgot a file." He headed toward his office. I held my breath. Had I put everything back exactly right? Had I closed the drawer all the way? One wrong detail and he'd know. He came out 2 minutes later with a folder. "You okay? You look pale." "Just hot. You know how the Arizona sun is." He nodded, already distracted, and left. I waited until his car disappeared before I let myself shake. That was too close. But it was also a reminder. I couldn't afford mistakes. Robert was smart, successful, and absolutely certain of his superiority. The only way to beat him was to be smarter, to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment. That moment came 3 weeks later. Robert announced he was going to San Diego for a conference. 4 days. He'd be staying at the Fairmont Grand Del Mar. Very fancy. Very expensive. I smiled and told him to have a good trip. The private investigator confirmed what I already knew. Amber was going too. They had adjoining rooms. The conference was real, but it was also cover for a romantic getaway. Sister Joan and I used those 4 days well. We met with a divorce attorney she'd recommended, a woman with a reputation for absolutely destroying cheating husbands in court. We went over every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. We built a timeline. We calculated the financial theft. We prepared for war. "He's going to fight dirty," the lawyer warned. "Men like him always do. He'll try to make you look unstable, emotional, vindictive. He'll use your age against you. He'll claim you're confused or forgetful. Are you ready for that?" I thought about 32 years of being dismissed, of being made small, of doubting my own sanity while he rewrote reality to suit his narrative. "I'm ready," I said. When Robert came home from San Diego, tanned and relaxed, I was waiting. Dinner on the table, his favorite wine, candles, the whole performance. "This is nice," he said, surprised. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. I just wanted to do something special for you." He smiled, relaxed, poured himself wine, started talking about the conference, dropping names, describing deals. I listened and nodded and asked the right questions. The dutiful wife, the supportive partner. After dinner, we sat on the patio watching the sunset over Camelback Mountain. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. I knew without looking it was her, Amber, probably texting him that she missed him already, that San Diego was magical, that she couldn't wait to see him tomorrow at the office. "Robert," I said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." He was scrolling through his phone, not really listening. "Are you happy?" That got his attention. He looked up. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Are you happy? In our marriage?" He set down his phone. I could see him calibrating, trying to figure out where this was going. "Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "Because you seem distant lately, like your mind is always somewhere else." "I've been busy with work. You know that." "I do know that." I paused. "I also know about Amber." The patio went very quiet. Robert's face didn't change. He was too practiced for that, but I saw his hand tighten on his wine glass. "I don't know what Marcus told you, but Marcus didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, or suspect, or choose to ignore. You're being paranoid." There it was, the gaslight, the automatic dismissal. Except this time I didn't flinch. "I'm really not. I have photos, Robert. Bank statements, emails, text messages, hotel receipts. I have documentation of every penny you've stolen, every lie you've told, every moment you've spent with her while pretending to work. I have the revised trust, naming her as beneficiary. I have everything." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, anger, and finally, calculation. "If you did have all that, which I doubt, what exactly do you think you're going to do with it?" "I'm going to take you to court. I'm going to show a judge exactly what kind of man you are. And then I'm going to take half of everything you've tried to hide from me. Maybe more than half, given the circumstances." He stood up. "You're out of your mind. You have no idea how this works. I have lawyers. I have resources. You have nothing. I have the truth, and I have Sister Joan." "Sister who?" "The nun who used to be a corporate litigator, the one who's been helping me build an airtight case against you, the one who's connected me with a divorce attorney who specializes in cases like this." Robert's face went pale, actually pale. I'd never seen him rattled before. It was almost satisfying. Almost. "You can't do this," he said. "I already have." I stood up too. "Tomorrow morning you're going to be served with divorce papers, at your office, in front of everyone, including Amber, and then the real fun begins. If you do this, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you get nothing. I'll tie this up in court for years. Go ahead and try. But Robert, I've got time, I've got documentation, and I've got nothing left to lose. You've already taken everything that mattered. What else can you possibly do to me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in our marriage, he had nothing to say. I walked past him into the house, gathered the overnight bag I'd already packed, turned at the door. "By the way, I'm staying at Patricia's until this is settled. You can have the house. You've always been good at having what's mine anyway." I left him standing on the patio, wine glass in hand, watching his life unravel. The confrontation in Robert's office happened exactly as I'd planned. I wanted it public because men like Robert live and die by their reputation. Private shame they can contain, explain away, minimize. Public humiliation is different. That spreads. That sticks. His office was on the 15th floor of a building in downtown Phoenix, all glass and chrome and expensive art. I'd been there exactly once in 32 years, at the company Christmas party back when such things still included wives. I walked in at 9 in the morning, right when the daily staff meeting would be starting. The receptionist tried to stop me. "Ma'am, You can't just, I'm his wife. I can. I walked straight to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Robert at the head of the table, mid-presentation. Amber was 2 seats to his right, taking notes, looking young and eager and completely unaware of what was about to happen. Marcus had been right. She was 29. Pretty in that generic way, with long blonde hair and a suit that was trying very hard to look professional but mostly looked expensive. I opened the door. 20 heads turned. I'm so sorry to interrupt, I said pleasantly. But Robert, you have a visitor. A process server stepped in behind me. Robert Mitchell? Robert stood slowly. His face was the color of old concrete. This is not the time or place. Sign here, please. The server held out the papers. What is this? One of the executives asked. Divorce papers, I said cheerfully. I'm divorcing Robert for adultery, financial abuse, and fraud. It's all documented in there. Very thoroughly documented. Thanks to the private investigator and the bank records and the absolutely lovely text messages he sent to his girlfriend describing me as the old ball and chain. Would anyone like to see those? I have screenshots. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. Robert signed the papers with a hand that shook. The server nodded and left. I stayed. Anything you'd like to say to your colleagues? I asked Robert. Any explanations? Apologies? No? I turned to the room. For those of you who don't know, that's Amber. I pointed. She's the reason your boss has been restructuring the company, the reason his son quit, the reason I'm about to own half of everything you all work for. Just thought you should know who you've been working alongside. Amber's face went from white to red. She grabbed her bag and ran. I watched her go and felt nothing. She wasn't the villain. She was just young and stupid and willing to believe a man who was good at lying. Robert was the villain. And Robert was about to learn what happens when you underestimate someone you've spent 32 years making small. I left without another word. Behind me, I heard Robert trying to regain control, his voice too loud, too defensive. It didn't matter. The damage was done. By noon, everyone in his professional circle would know. By evening, it would reach his golf buddies, his business associates, his social contacts. Scandal is currency in Phoenix society, and this was a jackpot. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Robert hired an aggressive lawyer who tried every trick Sister Joan had warned me about. They claimed I was mentally unstable. They implied I was making things up for attention. They suggested I was suffering from early dementia, that my memory of events couldn't be trusted. But we had the documentation. We had the photos. We had bank statements showing Robert had moved nearly $300,000 into accounts I'd never had access to. We had the trust revision. We had text messages where he explicitly discussed hiding assets from me. We had him dead to rights. The depositions were the worst part. Sitting across from Robert in a conference room while lawyers asked humiliating questions. How often had we had sex in the last year? When had I first suspected the affair? Why hadn't I confronted him sooner? Did I have any proof I'd contributed to his success? That last question made me laugh, actually laugh. The lawyer looked offended. I'm sorry, I said. It's just funny. Proof I contributed. I raised his children. I hosted his business dinners. I managed his household. I sacrificed my own career so he could build his. I was his free labor for 32 years, and you're asking if I have proof? My lawyer smiled. Robert's lawyer changed the subject. In the end, it wasn't even close. The judge was a woman in her 50s who took one look at the evidence and her face hardened. She granted the divorce. She ordered Robert to pay alimony that would continue for the rest of my life. She split the assets 50-50, which, given what he'd tried to hide, was actually generous to him. She also ordered him to pay my legal fees. All of them. The gavel came down, and Robert stood there looking 10 years older. His lawyer was already whispering about appeals, about fighting this, but Robert just shook his head. He knew he'd lost. In the hallway after, Marcus and Sarah met me. They'd both come for the final hearing. Sarah was crying. Marcus looked relieved. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Marcus said. "You told me when you could. That's all that matters." "What now?" Sarah asked. I thought about that. What now? I was 63 years old, divorced, and starting over. The house would be sold, the assets divided. I'd have enough money to live comfortably, but I'd lost 32 years. Lost them to a man who'd valued me less than furniture, less than his reputation, less than a 29-year-old who probably couldn't even remember the 80s. But I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost dead weight. "Now," I said, "I figure out who I am when I'm not someone's wife." 3 months later, I was sitting in Sister Joan's office drinking terrible coffee and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. "You look different," she said. I cut my hair. I had. Short, modern. Nothing like the conservative style I'd maintained for decades because Robert liked it that way. "It's not the hair, it's your face. You look like someone who can breathe." She was right. For the first time in years, I could breathe. My new apartment was small but mine. My schedule was my own. My money was my own. I joined a book club, started taking art classes, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with when Robert decided they weren't important enough for his social circle. I was learning who I was when I wasn't performing being someone's wife. "Have you heard from him?" Sister Joan asked. "His lawyer contacts mine occasionally about asset division details. Otherwise, no." I paused. I heard he and Amber broke up. Turns out she wasn't interested in a disgraced man with half his former net worth and a reputation for being a cheater. Shocking, right? Karma has excellent timing. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sister Joan leaned forward. "I want to talk to you about something. A lot of women come through my office in situations like yours. They need help, but they don't know where to start. Would you be interested in volunteering? Helping them navigate the practical stuff? Opening bank accounts, finding lawyers, documenting abuse?" "Me? You've lived it. You've survived it. You know exactly what they're going through, and you've got the battle scars to prove you made it to the other side." I thought about how lost I'd felt before Sister Joan, how desperately I'd needed someone who understood, someone who could show me the path through. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that." And that's how I ended up here, sitting in that same office twice a week, meeting with women who are where I was, women who doubt their own sanity, women who've been made so small they can't see their own value, women who think leaving is impossible. I tell them what I learned, that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse, that sacrifice without reciprocity isn't noble, it's exploitation. That self-doubt is often the first weapon a manipulator uses. I help them open bank accounts. I help them find lawyers. I help them understand that they're not crazy. They're being deliberately confused. That there's a name for what's happening to them, and there's a way out. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that could save you, or someone you love, from years of pain. Legal rights in marriage. Most people don't understand them. I certainly didn't. Did you know that in most states, including Arizona where I lived, all assets acquired during a marriage are considered community property? That means regardless of whose name is on the bank account or the deed, you're entitled to half. Robert spent years making me feel like I had no claim to his money, his business, his success. But legally, it was ours. I just didn't know it. Did you know that moving assets to hide them from a spouse before divorce is illegal? It's called dissipation of marital assets, and judges take it very seriously. Robert tried to squirrel away $300,000, and it cost him in the final settlement. The court didn't just split what was left. They factored in what he'd tried to hide. Did you know that emotional abuse and financial control are grounds for divorce in every state, even if there's no physical violence? For years, I thought I needed proof, like bruises, to justify leaving. but coercive control, isolating you from friends, controlling access to money, making you doubt your own perception of reality. That's abuse. And courts recognize it, especially when it's well documented. Here's what I want you to take away. If you're in a relationship where you feel small, confused, or trapped, start documenting everything now. Open your own bank account at a separate bank. You're legally allowed to do this. Take photos of financial documents. Save text messages and emails. Keep a journal of incidents with dates and details. Get copies of tax returns. Know what assets exist. This isn't about being paranoid or distrustful. This is about protecting yourself. Because the truth is, the legal system can help you, but only if you have evidence. My case was strong because Sister Joan taught me to document everything. Without that evidence, it would have been my word against Robert's. And Robert was very good at making people believe him. Also know this, you don't need your spouse's permission to consult with a divorce attorney. You can meet with one, learn your rights, understand your options, and then decide what to do with that information. Knowledge isn't betrayal. It's self-protection. And if you're reading this thinking, but my situation is different, I want you to ask yourself, different how? Because that's what I told myself. My marriage was different. Robert was just stressed. I was being oversensitive. The excuses I made for him are probably the same excuses you're making right now. The law exists to protect you. Use it. Don't wait until you're 63 and 32 years have evaporated. Don't waste decades on someone who's made you feel like asking for respect is asking for too much. You deserve better. And more importantly, you have legal rights that ensure you can get better. You just have to be brave enough to claim them. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long. I know it was hard to hear in places. But if even one person reading this recognizes themselves in my story and decides to do something about it, then sharing my shame was worth it. I want to know, what city are you in right now? What time is it where you are? Are you listening to this while you're cooking dinner, driving to work, lying in bed unable to sleep because your own relationship feels wrong, but you can't put your finger on why? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in my situation, or if you just want to support other women who might need to hear this, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. It helps women who are Googling, "Am I being emotionally abused?" at 2 a.m. Find communities of people who understand. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to keep telling these stories. Stories of women who were underestimated and came out stronger. Stories of survival and comeback and justice. Both the external kind and the internal kind. And here's the big question I want you to answer in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted him immediately? Would you have stayed quiet and planned like I did? Would you have done something completely different? I want to hear your thoughts, your strategies, your own experiences, if you're comfortable sharing them. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other videos. The first is about a woman whose husband tried to steal her inheritance. It's called "They Thought I Wouldn't Notice." The second is about recognizing gaslighting